Yo, what up? It's your boy, Mr. E, and today we're going to learn about naming triangles. Something you may not have known about triangles is they have names just like you and I, and they want to be called by them. They have a first and a last name.
Last name,
Galen.
first name,
Obtuse.
So what we're going to learn about is how we can more appropriately call triangles by their names. But before we go into that, I wanted to dive into a little history lesson on geometry. Long ago, in the 2D plane, the first thing that ever appeared was a line. And a line is just simply a segment that goes from point A to point B in the straightest fashion possible. And we usually measure lines by inches, centimeters, yards, feet, whatever system you want to use, but as long as it's length. So lines are measured by length, but if we were to combine two lines or have them intersect, where they intersect or cross, we would call an angle. And an angle is measured in degrees. And not the type of degrees you're thinking about, not Fahrenheit or Celsius, although they are kind of similar because they have a little small circle at the top right. But angles are measured in degrees, and it's when two lines intersect each other. But let's think about what would happen if we had three line segments. Once we connect three line segments, we have what's called a triangle. Get it? Triangle, three angles, tri, triple. But seriously, a triangle is when we have three sides and three angles, and that's how we're going to call them by their names. So let's take a look about how we would call a triangle by its name for angles. So the first type of triangle that we have is a right triangle. And a right triangle has exactly one 90-degree angle. And you can see in the bottom corner, there's a little square that is the symbol that shows this is a right angle. So that right angle is going to be exactly 90 degrees. Now, one thing we know about triangles is that triangles can only have one right angle. If they had two, we wouldn't be able to close it and it wouldn't form a triangle. So a right triangle has exactly one right angle. The next type of triangle that we have is an obtuse triangle. And an obtuse triangle has one angle that is greater than 90 degrees. So we can see in this triangle at the top, it's got a real big one. It's thick, like your boy Mr. E, you know, I'm kind of big boy. So obtuse triangles have one angle that is greater than 90 degrees. And then the last type of triangle we have is an acute triangle. And an acute triangle has all angles that are less than 90 degrees. And the way that I remember this is that it's smaller, it's littler than 90 degrees, so it's so cute because it's so little. Oh, look at that, a little acute triangle. So that's one way that I can remember what an acute triangle. All angles are less than 90 degrees. So those are the type of names we can use for angles. Let's talk about the type of names we can use for sides. So the first type of triangle we have for sides is a scalene triangle. And a scalene triangle has no congruent sides. And all congruent really means is they don't have equal sides or similar sides. So you can see in this scalene triangle, we have three sides that are all very different from each other. So that is considered a scalene triangle. The next type of triangle we have is an isosceles triangle. And they have at least two congruent sides. And that's where it can get a little confusing because if it has three congruent sides, it's still considered an isosceles triangle. It's at least two, so remember that. Something you might be noticing here is we have two little dashes in the top, and all that means is that these two sides are congruent to each other, or they are the same or equal to each other. So this is considered an isosceles triangle because it has at least two congruent sides. And then the way that I remember isosceles is that we have two isosceles, at least two sides that are congruent. So just a little way to remember that. And then the last type of triangle we have that we can name by its sides is equilateral triangles. And equilateral triangles have all congruent sides. So that means every side is the same length. Something kind of cool about equilateral triangles is they will also have all equal angles and they'll all be at 60 degrees. So equilateral has everything the same. So when we name a triangle, we like to name it by its first and its last name. So we name it by its angle and by its side. So we're going to take a look at a couple of problems where we're going to try to name these triangles by their angle and their side. All right, so we've got three triangles here and we want to name them by their angle and their side. So first, let's take a look at this triangle on the left. And we see there's a couple of different types of angles, okay? So we've got this really big boy over here, okay? That's 113 degrees. and that's bigger than 90 degrees. So we know that this type of triangle would be an obtuse triangle, okay? So that's gonna be the first name, is obtuse, okay? Then we gotta think about, okay, well, what do we name it by its sides? Something that we can't really see here is they don't have the measurements of the sides. We'd have to get a ruler out and kind of see what the sides were, and if we did, what we would notice is that all of these sides are different from each other. So this would be considered a scalene triangle because scalene triangles don't have any congruent sides. Another way we can tell this, and this is a little bit higher level, is that because the other two angles have different angles, 29 degrees and 38 degrees, we know the opposite sides are going to be different lengths as well. So you can always kind of tell about its length by its opposite angle. Let's move on to the middle triangle. So the middle triangle, we only have the lengths here, okay? So let's think about what we would call it by the lengths. I'm seeing they're all 54 inches. So if everything is 54 inches, that means they're all congruent. So that means they're the same. So we are gonna call this an equilateral triangle. So equilateral would be what we would call it by its side. So we know something about an equilateral triangle though, is that if it has all equal sides or all congruent sides, it's also gonna have all congruent angles. So if we have all congruent angles, that means they're all 60 degrees, and we can kind of see that with the triangle. They're definitely smaller than 90 degrees. So they're gonna be an acute equilateral. Oh, that's so acute, it's so little. One little thing I would like you to know though, is we could technically also call this an isosceles triangle, although equilateral would be more of an appropriate name because that's exactly what it is. But it is isosceles also because it has at least two congruent sides. So a little confusing, but you might see that on a test sometime soon. So we've got an acute equilateral triangle. Let's take a look at the last one. The last one we have, we've got a little square in the corner, and we know that that symbol means that we have a right angle. So we're gonna call it a right triangle. And then we see those two dashes, and the dashes, remember, tell us that the sides are congruent to each other. So this side and this side are the same length. So since it has at least two congruent sides, it's going to be an isosceles triangle. So isosceles. And I'm gonna admit, some of these words are really hard to spell. I'm really hoping that I spelled them right. I'm a math teacher, not a spelling teacher, although I was one a very, very long time ago. So it looks like we appropriately named all of these triangles. They all have their first and last name. It's totally okay if you name them by the side first, then the angle, it doesn't matter. Just like if someone said Ellsbury Jarris, I know that that would be me, or Jarris Ellsbury. So that is how we can appropriately name triangles, by their sides and angles. So hopefully this video was helpful. Hopefully you'll get a little practice with naming triangles so that you can get a hundo on your next test. Keep learning, Elsbros.